Christian, you almost cried. Cried. No, I when I told this video, I was almost crying because I was comfortable with that as well. Yeah. You didn't tell us anything that, but
Yes.
and the stop that we use to I know exactly what you're saying. We're very clear.
We have this conversation now.
Hey.
You like this light?
I think maybe a little dimmer.
The next step is dark, where you're illuminated and everyone's black, which is what I did, and that gets
Let's leave it like this then.
Yes?
Yeah, let's leave it like this. If we can't dim it just a little bit, that's fine. That's okay. Yeah, thank you though.
Yeah. There's extra water here, but you have water.
Yep.
So for those of you that are in here, Christian's going to be doing a workshop at 3 p.m. downstairs. If you are not a VIP and you missed this talk, feel free to let the VIPs go in first, but I don't think the whole room will be full. So you're all invited to go see Christian at 3 p.m.
Nice.
down in Conifer and overwhelm him.
Christian. Hey, my name's Christian as well. Yeah, I think it's inspiring that how your parents heard as responses. And also admirable that you talk about taking the responsibility from the awareness of our powers and connections. So, right on. That's awesome. And a really good thing for all of us to keep doing it for each other. So, thank you.
Predictable. Quantifiable.
I'll take that.
Are those your boys that were here?
This is not yours?
Oh,
It is not.
were yours up here?
Yes.
Oh, they were yours? Oh, no, they were fun.
Oh, yeah, it's fine.
They were a little hyper. But the minute you said go upstairs, they didn't argue. Yeah. And how young with their boys. Did they still
Here's Joel.
Oh, yes.
Adrian, did how many people were in Conifer?
So you came and brought all these friends.
3 o'clock. And I was full.
Well, the only key here is that we have it recorded.
Downstairs?
No, but it should be even. Don't know about Christians. There should be 77.
Oh, yeah.
Are you going to introduce whenever you're ready?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
And same with that was. Yeah, I found out by accident. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. I'm gonna adopt this expression. Yeah, so.
Adrian, it's better we go to take back.
Oh, okay, great. I think you'll like it.
Find a dimmer. I can't find a dimmer.
Oh, Diamond, that's okay. We should
All
do
right, so
that.
our next speaker, guys, is Adrian D'Amico, and did I say it right?
Yes.
He is good friends with Ben Davidson, who I started following at the beginning of the Suspicious Observers phenomenon. At the time, I was following Comet Ison because, according to what I believed, I thought Comet Ison was going to be an electric comet that was going to light up a little bit more than it did. And what I was waiting for was global unrest and a bunch of people jumping off of buildings. Because it's been a long time since a comet has come in and made people do that. And then, and it didn't happen. So there is a comet coming in 2026, and that'll be the one. But Adrian is good friends with Ben. So not only that, he's unique in this in these realms because he's a lawyer. Like when I found out he's like a corporate lawyer who studies aliens, it's pretty fascinating. He is the creator of Suspect Sky YouTube channel. For those who don't know, and he just published a book, which he's probably going to tell you about.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So without further ado, the corporate lawyer, alien guy, Adrian D'Amico.
Well, thank you all. And can we get a quick round of applause for the conference because day one was great. Yeah. And it's no easy task to do this and execute it successfully. So really great job. It's been done really excellent. And thank you for inviting me and the other presenters. So yeah, and by the way, is anybody else feeling the altitude effects? Okay, so I might drink this entire bottle of water during this talk, just so I don't sound too raspy. But please forgive me if I have to do that frequently. So yeah, we're gonna get started here. Yep, Adrian from Suspect Sky, the founder. We started in 2012, and we have a number of pillars of content that we sort of focus our research and our investigation on. That we're going to get into a little bit as we go through this. So unidentified flying objects, unidentified aerial phenomena, Vimanas, chariots of the gods, strange lights in the sky. So throughout the entirety of known human history, we have records, observations, and written accounts of something suspect happening in the sky. It's been with us forever as a people. So something is going on, and the evidence is there. And I am a bit of an oddity in that I'm a corporate lawyer who knows that aliens are real. And I think over the decades that I've been researching this, that I've pretty much figured out that there is sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that there is something in the skies and that alien and UFO phenomena is real. So the talk is entitled, Have We Ever Been Alone? Because this is sort of an interesting concept that I tackle in the book, and I'll share a little bit more about that. One of the content types that we do on the Suspect Sky channel is the project to collect as much realistic and legitimate footage of the phenomenon as possible and present it in compilations that are engaging and entertaining to the viewer. So we use things like music and editing to sort of thematically present it in an interesting and exciting way, in an effort to sort of be a little bit more viral, right? To get the message out so that it can be shared. And I actually have selected a couple clips here that hopefully the sound and stuff works that I'd like to share with you. These are all clips from the last 6 months. Oop, here we go. Brazil.
Any types of analysis? Oh, you did not try to say that. You just did a beautiful.
Yeah, pretty wild, right? And it's amazing. So our team has a network of volunteers across the world that send us footage like this that they find. It's actually very exciting to see sort of people willing and able to provide evidence and be able to share that experience with us. And then we sort of compile it. And you would be amazed at the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos that are sent in every month. So we do a compilation every month. So I don't think it's unreasonable to make the assertion that there is enough volume and frequency of sightings that there is something going on in the skies. And unlike a lot of other people, I don't think that they're all alien. They could be government, black triangles, for example, the aurora, plane, hidden technology. But there are enough that are very strange and don't really fit that philosophy. And if just one of them is real, then the entire paradigm and our understanding of the universe shifts. So it is an extremely important question that we are faced with as a community. And speaking with the community, all of you LeakConners here, there's something unique, I think, about people in this room. And what I call this unique quality is that we have Renaissance thought. And by this, I mean, unfortunately, in our society today, and particularly mainstream science, we become ever specialized at a particular area of interest. You are a senior programmer level 3, and that's what you do, and that's your silo. That's your world and your reality, and that's what you live in. The people in this community and the other communities that are involved in the search for truth, I think, apply Renaissance thought, meaning they have multiple disciplines that they study and multiple skills and areas of research that they sort of connect together. And this is why Leonardo da Vinci was so impressive, because he studied sculpting, he was an inventor, language. I mean, he was an expert in all these different philosophies, and he brought them together to really create breakthroughs. So I think that our focus as a society on specialization leaves a lack of these breakthroughs in understanding, which I think that our community possesses this quality, which is why I think the real research and the real truth will come out of people like you all. It's less susceptible to influence. So this, there are no big corporate Monsantos funding this, right? GMOs, in my opinion, have been allowed to exist because of the revolving door that sort of Diamond talks about. It's climate change science is funded by government programs and corporate interests. So we do not have that. So we are less susceptible to influence. And this is very important in terms of creating these breakthroughs in understanding. So the question, are we alone, is one of the biggest for our civilization. It's up there with, is there a God? What happens after death? Are we alone? This is one of these big, universal, fundamentally paradigm-shifting questions that if we were to answer any one of these, would change the human condition. It would change our understanding of reality and our philosophy and us as a people and how we interact with one another. So it's a really big question. So other people thought it was a big question too. So this is the Brookings report. This is a study that was organized in 1960, commissioned by NASA. And the idea was the human civilization was beginning to enter into space, right? We were beginning our Apollo moon programs, manned missions into outer space were beginning. And NASA said, well, wait a minute, are we missing something? Let's hire a think tank, this Brookings Institute. Let's hire them to figure out, have we missed any sort of problems or questions that might be highly relevant to the human exploration of space? And so the Brookings report said, yeah, there actually is. So it's very possible you're going to find artifacts on the moon or other planets in the solar system throughout your space exploration activities. And this is going to be a big problem for society. It's going to be extremely disruptive. Things like religion, belief structures, these things could collapse. It could cause a social disruption at a level that we've never seen before. And they also say something else that's pretty interesting. I actually don't have a slide of that particular page, but they also noticed that the people involved with the exploration of space are engineers and scientists. And those individuals are going to be the ultimate arbiters in answering the question, are we alone? And they also said something interesting. They said that these disciplines, scientists, engineers, have a psychological condition that they understand their purpose in life to be the mastery of nature. And to find evidence that another civilization or species might be a superior mastery of nature than them would be psychologically difficult for them to say, publicly because of this sort of condition. And that leaves us in a really interesting place. The people that we depend on to answer that question, are we alone, are the least likely to tell us that answer psychologically. So that's where I think people like our community, Renaissance thinkers, need to sort of apply our skills and take a look. So the title of this talk is called Have We Ever Been Alone? Because I think this is the real question, not are we presently alone? Do we find present evidence of extraterrestrial or non-terrestrial intelligence? Have they ever existed anywhere in the billions of years that the universe has been around? And I think that's the real question, because it would have the same psychological and social impact, the same disruption, regardless if they were presently with us now or not. And this brings up an interesting point. Is anybody familiar with the Drake equation? So the Drake equation is this concept, this attempt to estimate how many potentially intelligent communicating civilizations might be here now that we could find evidence of. But it lacks sort of the idea of a past civilization. Is there any archaeological evidence, for example, that we could find that might help us answer this question? So yeah, UFOs are fun to look at, and they're really exciting, and there's tons of evidence out there. But from a scientific perspective, we need to have a stronger basis and analytical framework to look at this with. And I suggest that we should begin on how do we measure civilization? What is it we're actually looking for out there? Sure, sightings are cool, but is there other stuff that we can find or evidence that we can locate that we can put now into a rational scientific framework to answer our question, have we ever been alone as a people? And I'm not the only one. There's many smarter people out there that have already thought of this idea. And it all began with a guy named Nikolai Kardashev. He's a Soviet astronomer, a very brilliant guy. And he wrote pretty much the paper that started this whole idea, this whole field. And it's entitled On the Inevitability and the Possible Structures of Super Civilizations. So Kardashev was really smart. And he said, you know, in the billions of years that the universe has been around, in the trillions of light years that we can see, it has to be inevitable that one civilization achieved a size and sophistication to build superstructures in space that maybe we can see with telescopes. This was the whole theory of the idea that Kardashev came up with. And it was interesting that he said, you know, it's not only possible, it's probably inevitable, because if life formed once, it's probably going to form somewhere else. And eventually, over the billions of years, these civilizations might build something big enough that we can see with our telescopes. He's also not the only one. So here's a picture of a concept of a Dyson structure. Is anybody familiar with what a Dyson sphere is? A Dyson sphere is, one idea of it is a totally encapsulated structure around a star that a civilization uses it to provide energy for its population. But there's also another potential Dyson's-like structure which is not a complete sphere, but sort of rings around it. So maybe these are things that we should be looking for in our telescopes. There's also other people that have created their own scales. So Kardashev came up with a type 1, a type 2, and a type 3 civilization scale. He puts the conditions for sort of measuring the civilization's progress up this scale involved energy consumption. So a type 1 would have the full capability of exploiting its local planet's energy resources. A type 2 could analogously exploit all the energy resources in its local solar system, and a type 3 would be the galaxy. So this was sort of the initial scale that Kardashev came up with in the 60s. But other people came up with other scales. So Carl Sagan, famous author, said maybe energy isn't really what we should be looking for. Maybe it's information. How much knowledge do we have as a society, and how accessible is that knowledge to our citizenry? Is sort of what Carl Sagan thought might be another alternative way to look at measuring a civilization. A guy named John Barrow came up with the idea of it's not really energy or information, it's really how technologically savvy are you at manipulating ever smaller components of reality. So genes, elements, molecules, all the way down to the fundamental fabric of space and time would be sort of the type 3 analogy under his scale. And then one of my personal favorites is a guy named Robert Zubrin said, you know what, enough with the science, right? What do we really see in the real world when we're looking and gauging civilizations? What we're looking at is how can that civilization project its influence around its environment? So for example, the Roman Empire, the British colonial empire, today's, I guess, American empire. So how can a civilization project its influence across its relative environment? So I actually suggest that we need a new scale. And this scale is called the civilization power scale. It's actually just a mix of Kardashev and Zubrin. And the idea is that when we're supposed to measure a civilization, we need to see both how much energy it can exploit, and then how can it project that energy and resources into its environment. So it's a mix of what Kardashev and Zubrin were talking about. So I like to round down. So I consider humanity presently as a 0.5 civilization. So in a few hundred years, we will likely reach a type 1, meaning that we can exploit the energy of our entire planet and project our influence across the entire planet. Would be what under the scale that I propose would have us as. And this could be happening in a couple hundred years, and we see evidence of it already. So we can modify the weather. We have a global internet. Information can be accessed everywhere by literally almost anyone. The sum knowledge of humanity has been digitized and placed into the internet. And then this little guy, I don't know, has anybody heard of the M drive before? So this is a real device developed at NASA's EagleWorks laboratory. This is a device, it's a space engine that produces produces thrust without propellant. Nobody knows how it works, but it works. Theories range from quantum vacuum energy to microwave radiation, all the way to radio energy. And it's actually, the M drive is sort of a neat name for it that is not really what it was named by NASA's EagleWorks laboratory. It's actually called an RF, radio frequency cabinet thruster, resonant cavity thruster. So the leading theory is that somehow radio waves or vacuum energy produces thrust. And this is the type of technologies that we are looking at seriously into developing that might be able to bring humanity influence into our greater solar system. So we're seeing evidence that we as a people are moving up this civilization scale. And it's probably likely that other civilizations have as well. If we can do it, are we that special? It's likely that others have as well. So once we understand sort of what we're looking for in terms of evidence, and we have a framework to measure civilizations and sort of think about possible places to look and things that we're looking for, I break up the search for extraterrestrial life into three sort of buckets. There are signals, radio signals, other types of signals that we can pick up, perhaps detect with our radio satellites. There's also physical signs. This is sort of what Kardashev talked about when he said, can we just point a telescope and see some type of evidence of an alien civilization's projects or constructions or just their influence of an environment somewhere else. And finally, one that is oftentimes left out is our backyard. So has there ever, in the billions of years of our solar system's existence, has a non-terrestrial civilization ever passed through and left some type of evidence? So there is potentially a lot of evidence that we could be finding within our own sort of backyard, areas that the M Drive might be allowing us to explore and visit and identify. So who's looking now? The scientists I mentioned, right, the ones least likely to tell you that there's any evidence out there, is pretty much SETI. So they're pretty much the sum total of sort of the organized search by the scientific community. And they have a couple of assumptions that a lot of people don't know about. One of which is they exclusively look to radio. So they ignore things like potentially laser light communication. They ignore physical signs like the search for Dyson structures. They deal only with radio. They also assume that interstellar travel is impossible. So they're not looking for evidence, say, of M Drive signatures of vehicles moving throughout the cosmos. So they exclusively look to radio, and they're assuming that interstellar travel is impossible, and they're just not even looking for any sort of signs of potentially ships or vehicles or other types of craft moving throughout the cosmos. It's also very human-centric. This is an important concept. Has anybody heard of the hydrogen line? So the hydrogen line is the frequency at which the element hydrogen resonates at. And it's 1420 megahertz. And, reasonably so. SETI said the sky is too big. There's virtually infinite numbers of frequencies we can be listening for radio signals on. We need a frequency to look at. We need to limit our search. We need to narrow our focus. And they said, well, you know what? Let's look at the most fundamental element, hydrogen. It resonates at 1420 megahertz. So let's look there. Let's monitor the sky at that frequency. They also, and my biggest pet peeve, is that the signals must repeat. So they have to detect it multiple times in order for it to be, according to them, a scientific confirmation and a valid hit of a potentially radio signal from an alien civilization. Well, lo and behold, we've detected a few. So we have WOW-1. This was detected at the Big Ear Telescope, I believe in the 70s, 75, I think. It was an extremely powerful transmission at 1420 megahertz, the hydrogen line, and it came from the Sagittarius constellation, as you can see here. And actually, if you look here, this is the signal. So it was proven to be outside of our solar system. It was on the hydrogen line, 1420 megahertz, and it was an extremely powerful signal, well beyond any background radiation noise. So, what was the duration? Looks like 120 seconds, I think, is how long it was. But it never repeated. So it wasn't a valid hit. Well, okay, so they said, well, let's start to think of other ways, other places we can look, other frequencies we can listen to. And somebody said, okay, perhaps it's possible that the hydrogen line could be produced naturally. So let's pick a new frequency, one that can't be produced naturally. And what they did is they multiplied 1420 megahertz by the number pi. And because pi is a non-terminating number, they were saying that this perhaps can't be produced as a signal naturally. So if we multiply by one number into another number, let's look at that frequency. And we're assuming that this would be pretty strong evidence of artificiality of a signal. They found one. So this is WOW-2. It was even more powerful than WOW-1. It was on this sort of magical, non-natural frequency. It also came from a star system that is very similar to our G-type star, with planetary bodies, exoplanets in habitable zones. So it's potentially a very good target, a good hit for evidence of an artificial signal coming from a non-terrestrial civilization. It didn't repeat, so they threw it out. SETI also has some overlooked opportunities, I think. So I think they're doing a great job. I also think that, like I said, there's sort of an infinite number of frequencies to look at, so they're making these educated guesses where to look at. Another team member on Suspect Sky, who's speaking after me, is named Gary Long. And he actually has an expertise in radio technology and engineering. And we've actually come up with a couple other places we should look in terms of searching for signals of alien civilizations. Similar to the hydrogen line, the golden ratio, 1.61 gigahertz, is one of these sort of fundamental mathematical truths of the universe that we would assume alien civilizations would recognize and maybe broadcast their signals if they're looking to tell other people that they exist. Maybe we should look there, which is different than the hydrogen line. It's pretty close, but it's a similar concept. Another thing is the idea of a spread spectrum signal. So you can sort of see in the background here, do you see how this is sort of a traditional sort of wow looking signal? Well, there's also the idea that you can spread that signal out across time and frequencies. And who uses this? The military. So this is a way to encrypt and hide the location of your signals when you're transmitting. And perhaps aliens, unlike us, who are stupid and broadcast our existence everywhere, perhaps they would try to sort of encrypt or hide their presence a little bit using what's called a spread spectrum technique. And then finally, we're looking at very high frequencies. These are really powerful signals. And the problem with looking at very powerful, high frequency, highly energetic signals is that they are susceptible to being dispersed when impacting things in the interstellar medium. So if it's traveling through dust, these signals tend to break up. So one of our ideas is perhaps we should be looking at very low frequency signals. These are things like submarines use sonar. That's a very low, quiet signal. It can pass through thousands of miles of thick water because it's very low frequency. So perhaps we need to be looking at the very low frequency end as well, much like submarines use sonar. But so this is sort of the search for signals. There's also, as I mentioned, there's signals, signs, and our backyard. So what about physical signs? Well, perhaps we can look at other star systems and see, is anybody manipulating that star in some way? Are they building a Dyson sphere around it? Are they changing the chemical composition of the star in some way? Are they blowing up nuclear bombs to extend the life of the inner core of the star? You know, whatever. Is there any type of evidence that we can see of star systems being manipulated? And I call it interstellar archaeology because due to the speed of light and the vast distances involved, this would be really old stuff that happened. So if we detect a signal, or I'm sorry, if we see a sign from thousands of light years away, it'll be thousands of years old, which is why we call it interstellar archaeology. They found something. So this guy named Bora discovered that out of 2.5 million stars cataloged in what's called the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, 214 of them, oddly enough, have coherent laser-like beams being transmitted out of them. He also argued that this had to be artificial because all of the 214 stars were shockingly in a stellar classification very similar to our star, which is habitable. So he argued that if these laser coherent light beams were some fundamental property of a star itself, that likely we would see them happening in many different types of stars rather than just our sun-like stars, is what he argued. And it was very coherent light that is not capable of being produced naturally. And this is also something that SETI doesn't look at. They don't look at laser beams. And also, there's been a lot of talk about Tabby star lately. I don't know if anybody's heard about this. This is a star that varies in brightness from by as much as 80%, which is kind of crazy to think about. I mean, imagine if our sun varied in its brightness by 80%. The mainstream is saying that this is some sort of cometary dust cloud or something like that, that it is dimming the star relative to us as this cloud sort of moves around it, which is possible. I have a bit of a problem with that because why don't we see it anywhere else? If this is sort of a fundamental homogeneous universe type of concept, wouldn't we expect to see other stars have this type of dimming? It's possible. It's just a very unique natural situation. But I think that it at least has to be thought of open-mindedly, that this potentially could be a modified Dyson structure, like that ring object that I showed in an earlier slide. Are we seeing the variations in brightness because there's some physical structure changing that variable brightness? And what about our backyard? So this is what I call interplanetary archaeology. So can we find weird structures on the moon and Mars of our own backyard solar system? And we do. So this is from the Lunar Observer mission. This is some structural element on the lunar surface. It's nicknamed the Tower Beyond Copernicus, but it just doesn't look natural. How did this naturally form on the moon? It's hard to kind of think of a natural process to do that. And is it possible that we could see millions of years old archaeological evidence on the moon, on Mars, on the other planets and bodies that we're visiting in the solar system, just like the Brookings report warned about? So they said, you're probably going to find stuff, and if you release it, it's going to cause a lot of social disruption. So this is from the Soviet Zond 3 mission. This is on the far or dark side of the moon. And what is that? So this is a huge structure of some kind on the dark side of the moon. And not surprisingly, you don't hear about this in sort of the Brookings-influenced US space program. So that's a real photo from the dark side of the moon done by the Soviet Zond program. I've heard a mile high is what I've heard. Yeah, so when you compare, so I mean, this is the crest of the lunar surface. Imagine how gigantic that. I mean, imagine if something was sticking out of the Earth's, crust like that. Is that natural? I mean, planetary bodies don't really form those types of objects. We also see tracks on the moon. The mainstream explanation for this is a meteorite impact that is bouncing and leaving what looks like tracks along the lunar surface. I argue that that's highly unlikely because of the even-spaced nature of the track that is going for hundreds of miles. So I think that's a very poor explanation of sort of a meteorite skipping on the surface of the moon like a rock skipping on water. How could it be possibly evenly spaced impacts if it's losing velocity as it's hitting the surface? So is this evidence of ancient rovers on the moon, ancient roads? Who knows? But it's something very peculiar and very non-natural looking. We also see the same thing on Mars. So it's a little hard to see, but the tracks are here as well. They're evenly spaced tracks found on the Martian surface. We also have something else weird on Mars. This is the face on Mars. I'm sure everybody's seen photos of that. The face on Mars is actually part of a much larger structural complex. So you can see some sort of pyramidal looking structures here. This is found in the Sidonian region of Mars. And that's the face right there. And there's a bunch of really interesting relationships, mathematical and geometric relationships of this evidence of perhaps structural activity on Mars. And also, I like to remind people, think about what the human civilization would look like 1,000,000 years from now. So if the human race was wiped out tomorrow by a catastrophe, what would 1,000,000 years from now, what would the evidence of our existence look like? There wouldn't be much. So I argue that it likely would be plastics might be still around, and very large structures such as Mount Rushmore built into granite, built in climates that are likely less susceptible to erosion. Those might still exist. And what does that remind you of? The face on Mars, Mount Rushmore. Pyramids might survive 1,000,000 years. But the vast majority of cities and things would just be rubble, rusted, grown over. It would be very difficult for somebody using a little rover to find any evidence of us ever being here. So I mentioned the mathematical relationships. The pyramid complex applies to the golden ratio. So that complex is laid out in a way that is the golden ratio, which is also which is that gigahertz frequency I mentioned, 1.61 that we might want to look at. So is this a message? Sort of similar to how our pyramids are laid out according to cardinal coordinates and things, and they align with constellations and stuff. Perhaps that's exactly what we're seeing in the Sidonian region of Mars. There's even more. So there's the Sphinx on Mars compared to the Sphinx on Earth. Is this the rubble and remnants of a Sphinx-like structure on the Martian surface? It's a little fuzzy, sorry about the resolution, but you can see potentially this is the body, this is the head, and here are the paws down here. There's even more. So this is on the moon of Mars called Phobos. This is some structural looking monolith. It's nicknamed the Phobos monolith. That just looks very odd. It looks very unnatural. This is filmed from a satellite. But don't take my word for it. Buzz Aldrin actually noticed this. And
habitation on the moon. We can visit other people with their habitation. We can keep track. If there's something very important to be developed from the moon, I'm not sure what it is right now. And I sure think we should identify what it is for America to make such gross expenditures again for human habitation on the moon. We can help. We can join with. Together, we can explore the moon and develop the moon. We should go boldly where man has not gone before. Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, who put that there? Who put that there? Well, the universe put it there. If you choose, God put it there. Maybe.
So you see, he realized what he said, and so he quickly corrected himself. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. He's publicly said that he's seen UFOs in space as part of his lunar mission. Yeah, he's a really fascinating. If you're ever interested in the Apollo moon program, there was a lot of weird stuff. I have a video on Vimeo. It's actually blocked on YouTube. But it's called NASA Alien Footage and UFO Secrets. And I cover a lot of the really, really weird stuff that was part of the Apollo program. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little off topic, but it's one of my favorite videos that I've done.
Do you have the title for it, or what's your site?
It's just Suspect Sky at Vimeo. Yeah. And it's really crazy. They were told they had scripted things that they had to say at certain times of the mission. But then when you dig up the black boxes, this is actually public information, the astronauts were talking about things that were not aired publicly. And they were talking about things like campfires on the moon. They heard music on the dark side of the moon. So there's a lot of weird stuff in the Apollo program that you should definitely check out.
Habitation.
Just another thing. So this is a video, or this is a photo from one of the Martian observers. What are these little things? I don't know. When you look at it in higher resolution, I'm sorry, the projector is kind of, but are they statues? I don't know. It's kind of odd how you have these little things here sort of organized in a way on the Martian surface. And then, of course, this one. This is called the Demon. Is this a Mount Rushmore type structure on the Martian surface? Or is it just human nature to find sort of images in things like, we look at clouds and stuff. But the sum total of all this stuff is starting to paint kind of an interesting picture, right? Maybe once and twice, it might be just sort of a trick of the eye, but over time you start to wonder, what are we really seeing in our own backyard? So I mentioned the types of civilizations, right? 1, 2, 3. But in the book and whatnot, I argue that there's 2 additional types of civilizations beyond a type 3. There's a type 4, which can control and exploit and exert its influence across many galaxies, sort of like a supercluster concept. And then the type 5, you'll have to read the book to find out what that is. But the type 4 would be such a massive civilization and would produce such enormous structures at such an incredible scale. So we're talking a multiple galaxy spanning civilization. Is it perhaps building a sufficient number of structures that block a substantial amount of the starlight coming from that region of the universe? And this is a real picture. So this is called Boetti's Void. The mainstream explanation is that For some reason, galaxies just didn't form here, but they formed everywhere else, which kind of goes against the homogeneity concept that the universe is sort of the same everywhere else. And so is this perhaps a vast network of something similar to Dyson structures that are just blocking a significant amount of sunlight? And are we seeing that here? There's also another concept that we've came up with, and that's called the covert dark. So it's dark for a purpose. I'd argue that rational civilizations, unlike ours, would not be willing to broadcast their existence all over the place. Just because imagine if there was a resource competitive neighbor that was more advanced than you, they might take your resources. So I think that most intelligent civilizations will attempt to hide their existence as much as possible. Perhaps building Dyson structures to block starlight, perhaps using spread spectrum frequency signals to communicate via interstellar distances. So I think fundamentally our search needs to be more open-minded and more analytical a little bit. So I just say there were all these wow signals and things, and we're looking for civilizations to basically say, hey, we're here, but I don't really think that they are. So I think we need to be a little bit more critical and a little bit more investigative in our search. Also, sort of on an aside, the idea that these covert dark civilizations, that's sort of a term that I've coined for this concept, they likely would not want to interact with us. They might surveil us, but I don't think that they're just going to say, hey, we're around here and just openly interact with us. And isn't that what we see with UFOs, right? It's sort of spooky lights in the sky every often, but they're not landing on the White House lawn and saying, hey, we're here. So I think the sightings evidence fits nicely into this framework as well. Do I have time? Yeah, okay. So the next thing that everybody likes when I talk about is fast radio bursts. So we're sort of returning back to signals. Have people heard of FRBs? They're pretty big in the media. Technically, they are called narrowband millimeter transmissions. It's basically a fancy way of saying that these are extremely powerful. They're probably the most powerful signals we've ever detected. They occur in a rapidly short amount of time. So they're here and they're gone in a millisecond or two. And the amount of energy that is in an FRB and to have traveled the billions of light years that they've traveled to get here is astounding. It's about the amount of energy the sun produces in an entire year concentrated in a millisecond. So it's pretty crazy level of energy. And so you can see here's the FRB that was detected. It's that spike. And what you're looking at here, this curve, is the difference between the frequencies of when the signal originally hit the radio telescope and then a millisecond later when it ended. And this is that discrepancy. This discrepancy in frequency is called dispersion measure. And scientists use it to estimate the distance of which this signal traveled before it reached us. And they use it as, it's an estimated guess, but it's pretty good because we have a good understanding of how powerful a signal is, how short this band should be had it not impacted dust and other junk as it traveled through the universe. So what they do is they estimate the distance based off of the measurement of a dispersion between its receiving and its ending signal. And it's definitely the biggest thing since WOW. But don't trust me. We have Abraham Loeb, director of Harvard University's astronomy department, and he thinks FRBs, and he publishes papers on this, he thinks FRBs is evidence of solar sails. So the idea would be there's a powerful energy wave, perhaps radio frequency based like FRBs are, impacting a solar sail and propelling a vehicle through space. And as we move relative to the origin point of this signal, we get almost a sweeping effect, almost like if you were to take a flashlight and sort of throw it like this. And that's why FRBs are so powerful and so brief. He also, interestingly enough, thinks Oumuamua that was that object that sort of passed through our solar system recently. He actually thinks that that's also solar sail technology. And that the whole idea that this was some weird spinning comet that changed velocity is just nonsense. So, and he's a very big person in the field saying this publicly. So it's pretty exciting. FRBs, they also repeat. So this is fascinating. So we found a repeater back in 2012, and this was the first detected repeater. It repeated something like 90 times, which is crazy to think about it, and it gets even crazier the more that we dig into it. But they did a paper. They studied the statistics of these repeating signals coming from somewhere. They studied the statistics of it, and they found that it clusters. So it's not like a pulsar, which is very even, very predictable. It's almost like we'll get 10 signals in a month, and then it'll be quiet for another couple of months. So it's fascinating. The leading theory that is natural origin hypothesis, and trust me, they've disproven like 50. So everybody's trying to figure out what these are, and it's sort of much boiled down to this. Are FRBs asteroids hitting neutron stars? Is that why they cluster? Because as you move through greater volumes of asteroids, are you getting the effect of sort of a clustering repeat effect? But it doesn't explain a lot. It doesn't explain why some repeat and the vast majority don't repeat. It also doesn't explain a lot of mathematical properties that we're going to get into in a second. And probably most importantly, it doesn't explain this idea of linear polarization. So what is linear polarization? Well, this is the idea that FRBs, based off of the quality of the signals, are not an omnidirectional bubble of energy expanding out in all directions. It is a focused straight line of a signal. And how does that explain, as we move around the universe and the origin point moves around the universe as well, how is it that something billions of light years away is hitting us over and over and over again? It doesn't make sense. So I argue that they could potentially be directed transmissions to us, which actually is a very creepy avenue to go down, which we won't. Or is there somehow some kind of quantum entangled properties between us and this origin point? You know, how is it that billions of light years away, billions of years ago, a transmission was sent with more power than the sun can produce in a year, and as we move relative to this origin point, it's hitting us over 90 times. It's really fascinating stuff. So when they first detected FRBs, they started to find a really weird pattern. So this is a measurement of distance, and this is multiples of a number called 187.5. And the first couple FRBs, the first 11 or 12 of them, are all equally spaced distances from one another. Isn't that weird? So we couldn't explain this. As we found more FRBs, this 187.5 correlation didn't hold entirely, but 86% of FRBs are an exact multiple of the number 187.5. It's pretty wild. What is 187.5? So we did some research into what's the meaning of this number. It turns out to be a fundamental concept in thermodynamics called macrostates. And if you can see here, the number 187.5 is way at the top, right? And without getting too deep into thermodynamics, what this is saying is that the lowest macrostate, which is a concept in thermodynamics related to how likely is something to occur, the least likely thing to occur in a simple thermodynamic model has a macro state of 187.5. Is this a message? Is this a hydrogen line used? Is this another fundamental mathematical truth that's being broadcasted to us? And what's also interesting about this is the number 187.5 literally means this is the least likely thing to occur naturally in a thermodynamic. So it's really fascinating that that's the number that we're picking up. Real quick, because I don't want to spend too much time on this, I also posit that one way alien civilizations might be attempting to broadcast their existence, but not threaten their existence, might be to put in fundamental truths like 187.5 into the signals that they're sending in their asteroid avoidance radars. So we as a civilization have big radio telescopes that sweep the sky and look for near-Earth objects that might threaten us. Other civilizations are probably doing that as well. And because of the sweeping nature of these asteroid avoidance radars, you are extremely unlikely to hit the same location more than once. So I'm wondering in the night sky as you move relatively to one another. So I'm wondering maybe one way would be to put in math into these scans just to let people know, hey, we're here, but we're not going to tell you where we are. This works with the vast majority of the FRBs. It doesn't work for the repeaters because there's something weird going on with the repeater. And what do you know? We found a second repeater. So the second repeater was discovered in August 14th, 2018, detected by a Canadian telescope. No data has been released. So I don't know the dispersion measure. I don't know how far away these things are. And I don't know if it matches the 187.5 model. I do know there were about 10. So this could significantly up that 86% if they match the 187.5. But I've been able to not find any data on that. It hasn't been published yet. So let's take a look at the first repeater again, because this was crazy. First repeater, 90 FRBs have come from there. These numbers here are the right ascension and declination and dispersion measure distance of this repeating FRB that's hit us 90 times. So this is where in the sky it's coming from. It's a multiple of 3 compared to 187.5. And I couldn't believe that, actually, I was the first person to do this, and I actually wish I had done this years ago, but I put in these coordinates. So where in the night sky is this coming from?
How old is this thing?
It's coming in the smack dab middle of Orion's belt.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy? So here's the right ascension and declination, and here's the source of the FRB. It doesn't mean it's coming from a star in Orion's belt. It means at the very least it's passing through that area of the sky. But Orion has always traditionally had a very, very interesting history in human civilization, right? We build pyramids that look at it and map the stars of the belt and stuff. So this was really a fascinating discovery. The second repeater is coming from a constellation that I always mispronounce, Camelopardalis. Is that how you say it? I don't know. It's really hard for me to pronounce. But what's interesting about the second repeater is on a map of the night sky, Orion is here, and the other constellation is on the exact opposite side. So what does that mean? So suspect sky, we look at other stuff too, in addition to UFOs and sort of the search for non-terrestrial intelligence. We're working on a catastrophe science book. I'm sure everybody likes it. And Gary, who's actually presenting next, he actually found physical copies of these books. These are now available at suspectsky.com for free to download if you'd like to do your own research. And we're actually going to be releasing a very in-depth biographical look at who this individual, I don't want to reveal too much just yet, but he has a lot of very strange connections to sort of conspiratorial science and ancient knowledge and stuff. So look forward to that. We, of course, always continue our investigation and collection of data regarding UFO and sightings phenomenon. We call it the visitor phenomenon, if anybody's interested. But this is actually an image from an amateur telescope of something in the sky. It looks very structural. It's very odd. It has light that sort of varies across it. And finally, one of the other pillars of our work is the rise of the New World Order. So this is something that we call the corptocracy. This is the idea that there is an unholy alliance between big business and big government and an agenda to basically take away constitutionally granted rights, human rights from you. It's designed to poison you because, how is it possible that we have things like GMOs, aluminum, solar radiation management, all this stuff going on and nobody can do anything about it? Fluoride, I don't know if you knew this, but fake sugar, aspartame, when combined with aluminum in vaccines is toxic. So how's all this legal? How's all this happening? And it's basically because those we trust to regulate this type of activity are corrupted and influenced by corporations, but it also goes the other way. So it's not so much that the corporations are evil and the government is fine or vice versa. There is an element within each of these institutions that is elitist and working together is sort of what the evidence. So we do usually a weekly podcast where we investigate this stuff. And this Rise of a New World Order is a trilogy of 3 videos going to about 4 hours long. It's very critically acclaimed, is well received. And you basically watch the New World Order rising from 9/11 in primary source evidence. So you're watching news clips, footage of planes hitting I mean, it's like you're living the experience and watching it rise. It's pretty wild. I know a lot of people here are interested in catastrophe science and sort of the environmental catastrophes that we're threatened with, but this is a social catastrophe. This will break at some point, and when that happens, it could be just as dangerous. Yes, so if you go to YouTube, if you just Google that, it'll be the first one. So yeah, I just thank you very much. Gary Long's coming up next. Yeah. I guess maybe we have a minute for questions. I don't know, Diamond, should I? Yeah, does anybody have a question? Yeah, sure.
Those, how old are the radio waves themselves? What's the estimated age?
Oh, so when they look at dispersion measure, they're guessing how far away it came from. And the vast majority are billions of light years away, meaning they're billions of years old. It's also interesting, why do relatively nearby galaxies not produce FRBs? Right. So it's really a mystery. Yeah. So if an FRB was to launch in our galaxy, it would be equivalent in radio energy, in sort of visible light, of the entire sky turning white. It would be like one of the most powerful things.
It would have to be, because the amplitude to travel from point A to B.
Yeah, so they are extremely powerful. But okay, one last question.
I just wanted to mention, since you said the repeater, there's a repeater coming from the direction of the center of our isotope. There's another one in the opposite direction.
Yep.
The whole 360 degree, whatever, the firmament wall, whatever that is, the heavens, whatever. It's not that different. If you walk into an apartment building, you have security, you generally have a camera on one side and on the other side. It's a symmetry thing.
Yeah.
My guess is that if there is some overarching power that is like coordinating it all, wouldn't it make sense if somebody is focusing on Earth? Wouldn't it make sense to have one end and the other at the other end?
I think so.
It's stereo vision.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know if that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question about that would be a tremendous amount of travel time. Why would they care?
But the thing is, if you watch, I was not into this until just very recently. You watch the thing by the lady who reports on this, she does the Earth Files. She
Yeah.
says that there are some very, very ancient beings out there, and they all are serving some supreme power groups. So they could coordinate.
Yeah, or is it ancient humans? I don't know. Yeah. All right. I think Diamond's gonna introduce you. I think. But, okay, you should be all set up.
What about black stars? Some comments on black stars earlier when you played?
No, not really. But I think it's sort of similar to the idea of wrapping it around in the places.
Yes, that's not.
I think it's
Are you all ready to go, Bank?
ready to go.
Okay, so for those of you that just watched the last talk, because I was outside, you were listening to Adrian D'Amico from Suspect Sky, and if you watch that channel, you probably heard this gentleman is about to present next. Gary Long is part of, I don't know, do you call yourself something like the shadow government, or is it the Suspect Sky team?
Team, yeah.
Team, yeah, he's a member of the Suspect Sky team. And I don't know, you guys sometimes are on Fly on the Wall. Is that true? Yeah.
Sometimes.
So these guys have been studying the sun, studying all of the sciences that the mainstream is not telling us about. And Gary's the guy that goes a little deeper because he has more experience than most. If you don't know yet, the older you get, the more you know, typically. That's how it works. And so Gary is going to be talking about some things that are in plain sight that all of you know about. I mean, it's embedded in the megalithic structures. It's embedded in the layout of cities. It's embedded in your money. It's everywhere.